Objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess of the subcommittee at any time. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on unlocking Indian country's economic potential. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chairman and the ranking minority member, and I therefore ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted in accordance with Committee Rule 3.0. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Stansberry, be allowed to sit and participate in today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. Today, there are 574 federally recognized Indian tribes with a population of approximately 2.8 million American Indian and Alaska Natives living in the United States. There are approximately 56 million acres of Indian land, and of that, 46 million acres belong to Indian tribes. And an additional approximately 44 million acres of land in Alaska are owned in fee simple by Alaska Native corporations under unique terms established by Congress to settle Aboriginal land claims in Alaska. Although tribes are sovereign governments, some suffer health, social, and economic disparities, as well as higher poverty rates in comparison to other non-Native communities. These disparities contribute to higher rates of unemployment in Indian country and an underdeveloped business and entrepreneur environment. For many Indian tribes and Alaska Natives, real property holdings are the basis for social, cultural, and religious life, and often their single most important economic resource. Typically, Indian lands primarily fall into one of three categories: trust, fee, and restricted fee. Trust land is owned and managed by the United States through the Department of the Interior, and these lands are held in trust for the benefit of an Indian tribe or individual Indians. It is inalienable and non-taxable. Restricted fee land is fee simple land that an Indian tribe or individual Indian may own and hold title, but is subject to a restriction against alienation and taxation. An Indian tribe or individual Indians also own fee simple land that can be freely alienated or encumbered without federal approval. The current paradigm of the trust responsibility as conceived and implemented by the government has, in the view of some, wreaked all manner of harm on tribal communities. When federal Indian land is held in trust by the Department of the Interior, legal title to that land is effectively owned by the federal government. This distinction means that no decisions about these trust lands can occur without the approval of Washington bureaucrats, and this can slow or in some cases halt development for years. It also drives up costs. While some statutes, like the Long-Term Leasing Act, have enabled some tribes to lease their land for longer terms, many tribes still face the effects of the Non-Intercourse Act, which limits their ability to buy, lease, or sell land for economic development purposes. We're going to hear some of those stories today from our witnesses and what these individual exemptions allowed the represented tribes to accomplish. Expanding the ability of tribes to use their land in ways without needing to come to the government for approval is crucial for furthering self-determination and economic security. It is in this spirit that yesterday I introduced a bill that would allow all federally recognized tribes to authorize leases of up to 99 years for lands held in trust. This would get rid of the piecemeal approach Congress has taken on these requests for the past 67 years. Congress should continue to provide additional tools to all federally recognized Indian tribes to conduct the activities that they choose. Tribal governments already seek to make the best decisions for their members, for their social, cultural, and economic security. We should ensure that Indian lands, whether owned in fee, owned in restricted fee, or held in trust for the benefit of the tribes, are able to be used as the tribes want to use them. I look forward to today's discussion and how Congress can remove onerous restrictions on Indian lands, including trust lands, so that the tribes can unlock economic potential and diversify their business and economic interests. The chair now recognizes the ranking minority member for his statement.
Good morning, all, and thank you to the witnesses for joining us here today. I'd also like to extend my warm welcome to the chairwoman who is now heading up the committee, and I look forward to ongoing bipartisan support on the issues of affecting Native American tribes and our indigenous peoples as well as the insular areas. And I think that that's one of the wonderful parts of this committee, this subcommittee. It has always acted in a way that puts the interests of our indigenous peoples, our Native Americans first. And for that, I am very, very pleased and proud of the great work we've done. Economic sovereignty is how I often think of these issues, right? Tribes need economic sovereignty. And today's topic of unlocking Indian tribes' economic potential is especially timely after the great bipartisan economic development work we accomplished last session. We did get a lot done, and there is always more to do. The journey is a journey, right? We constantly have an obligation to move ourselves forward. So last Congress, we passed 26 tribal bills out of the House of Representatives, 18 of which were signed into law, and this noted the bipartisanship work we did. And indeed, the two bills that we passed last Congress, which we'll be hearing more about today, S. 3773 authorized the leases of land for the Confederated Tribes of the Chehalis Reservation, and S. 108 to authorize the Seminole Tribe of Florida to transfer lease certain lands. And, when we brought those bills, and as we talked about those bills, we pointed out the importance of making sure that we didn't continue to do this on a piecemeal basis, but that we would create a fix that would apply to all tribes. And so thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman, for introducing the legislation, and we look forward to working with you as we move forward on it. So we laid the groundwork back there for the broader fix, because we know that there are indeed obstacles, and especially in terms of being able to move quickly on issues around developing tribal land. I did that work for about 30 years, so I was grinding my teeth more than once over the difficulties we were having getting the BIA to move quickly on leases or rights of ways. I worked hard to have the BIA change its right-of-way and leasing statutes so that it would be easier for tribes to move. Because what we're dealing with is not a silver bullet, but is one of the important pieces as we move forward. The bipartisan infrastructure law, for example, we sent $13 billion for tribal communities, but if we cannot get those $13 million into the ground because rights-of-way or leases are taking too long, that's going to be a problem, which is why we actually did appropriate additional monies for the BIA to address the studies they need to do. My bill last year dealing with tribal historic preservation officers and the whole Section 106 study to provide more funding for that, to permanently authorize it, would be another step that we need so those processes move faster. I need to tell you about one example of a great economic development engine in New Mexico, because I think it is telling about one way you could do this. So the 19 Pueblos own jointly former boarding school land in Albuquerque, and they operate it jointly through a Section 17 corporation. What they have chosen to do is to provide leases of that land in a master lease concept, right? So they get all the approvals up front, and then they themselves direct the development of that land so that retailers are renting from them, so that the BIA is renting office space from the tribes it serves themselves, generating significant resources. And one of the things that I love about this is as they are generating those resources, they are making sure that they are controlling both the land, the use of the land, and providing the cultural resources that are so important. So on that land is the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center, the center that is one of the third most visited sites in New Mexico, and we have a lot of tourism. So that's why I think it's such a beautiful example of how do we help tribes do what the Indian Pueblo marketing did in New Mexico, which is develop their lands, continue to control their economic destiny, as well as protecting their cultural heritage. So I look forward to hearing the testimony of the witnesses today as we move to promote tribal economic sovereignty. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, and I will now introduce our witnesses. The Honorable Dustin Clatouche, Chairman, Confederated Tribe of the Chehalis Reservation, Oakville, Washington. The Honorable Joseph Rupnick, Chairman, Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation, Mayetta, Kansas. The Honorable Waveline Saunders, Vice Chairwoman, Tohono O'odham Nation, Sells, Arizona. And Mr. Jason Robison, Lands and Resource Officer, Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians, Roseburg, Oregon. Let me remind the witnesses that under committee rules, they must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. To begin your testimony, please press the talk button on the microphone, which I often forget, and we must use timing lights. When you begin, the light will turn green. When you have 1 minute left, the light will turn yellow, and at the end of 5 minutes, the light will turn red, and I will ask you to please complete your statement. I will also allow all witnesses on the panel to testify before member questioning. The chair now recognizes the Honorable Dustin Clatouche for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chair Hageman, Ranking Member Ledger Fernandez, and members of the committee. My name is Dustin Clatouche, and I'm the chairman of the Confederated Tribes of the Chehalis Reservation. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today on the Chehalis Tribe's recommendations to promote and eliminate barriers to tribal economic development. The Chehalis Reservation is located halfway between Seattle and Portland off Interstate 5 in southwest Washington State. Southwest Washington has long been an economically depressed area lacking in businesses and jobs for both tribal members and non-natives alike. Most of the tribe's 4,800-acre land base is in a floodplain, and the tribe has very little land suitable for economic development. For this reason, the tribe has had to be innovative with the land that it has to maximize our ability to generate revenue and to provide for our citizens. The Chehalis tribe is proud to have accomplished 2 firsts in Indian country. In 2008, the tribe constructed the first Great Wolf Lodge water park on Indian lands. The tribe also opened the first legal distillery in Indian country. Congress helped in the effort by repealing an 1834 law that prohibited constructing distilleries on Indian lands. The law was part of the 1834 Non-Intercourse Act and required Indian agents to destroy and break up distilleries within the areas. The law even stated that in breaking up distilleries, it shall be lawful to employ the use of the military force of the United States. The tribe's Talkin' Cedar Brewery and Distillery was the first ever legal distillery in Indian country. It is also the largest craft distillery west of Mississippi River. This success could not have occurred if Congress had not repealed the 1834 law. Like the now repealed distillery law, there are laws within the committee's jurisdiction that should be repealed or be amended to make them more accessible to tribes. Late last year, Congress added the Chehalis tribe to the list of Indian tribes for which the Bureau of Indian Affairs can approve 99-year leases. The tribe had received 2 letters of intent from outside the companies to develop warehouse facilities on reservation land that the tribe owns along major highways. Both proposals required leases with terms longer than the 25 initial term and the single 25-year extension allowed under the Long-Term Leasing Act. So we went to work on a bill that added the Chehalis tribe to the statute and allowed the Chehalis tribe to enter into 99-year leases. These bills have always been non-controversial because they simply allowed the secretary to approve leases of up to 99 years, but did not require it. We were hopeful that the bill could steadily progress through the legislative process. What occurred, however, was a drawn-out situation where all Indian-related bills were being held in the Senate for a reason unrelated to the merits of the bills themselves. Months dragged on with no Senate floor movement on nearly all Indian-related standalone bills, including our bill. The tribe was fortunate to have been finally have its bill approved by the Senate on December 20th, 2022. The House passed the bill on December 22nd, 2022, and sent it to the President. Since the tribe's bill was signed into law, the tribe has re-engaged with third-party developers in hopes to find or to have deals in place soon and begin construction during the building season this year. While working to secure passage of the Chehalis Tribe's 99-year lease bill, the tribe advocated for an amendment to the Long-Term Leasing Act that would allow all Indian tribes to obtain 99-year leases. We do not believe that individual bills and tribes to the statute is good for the use of tribes or Congress's time and resources. Given our experience, we urge Congress to amend the Long-Term Leasing Act to allow all federally recognized Indian tribes the option to enter into leases with terms of up to 99 years. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. I look forward to answering any questions that the committee may have.
I thank the witness for his testimony. The chair now recognizes the Honorable Joseph Rupnick for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Madam Chair Hageman, Ranking Member Leisure Fernandez, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. My name is Joseph Rupnick, and I serve as chairman for Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation. I'm a veteran of the United States Cavalry, and I represent about 4,500 Prairie Band Potawatomi people, most of whom live on the reservation in Kansas, which is defined by our 1846 treaty with the United States government. I am honored to be with you here today to share my thoughts of unlocking Indian country's economic potential, particularly as it relates to the ownership and use of tribal lands. Originally, our people owned and resided in the lands of northern Illinois, but we were subject to removal treaties in 1829 and 1833 that relinquished all but 1,280 acres of land. Our 1846 treaty established a 900 square mile reservation for us in Kansas, but development pressures, the federal government's land allotment policies, and outright theft resulted in most of our lands being lost to non-Indians. Just a few decades ago, our nation owned less than 5% of the land originally promised to us. Today, lands within our reservation are heavily checkerboard, meaning that there are mixed parcels of land within the reservation owned by our nation, individual nation citizens, and non-Indians. And because this status of land differs based on ownership, so too does the jurisdiction and taxing authority of the tribal, federal, state, and county governments. Frankly, what the government has done to us and our lands has been nothing more than to create a mess. This mess is compounded by the fact that these lands that we have retained are considered to be trust, that is, lands owned by and under the jurisdiction of the federal government. In my view, the idea of trust land is not normal and should be fixed to recognize that our nation is the owner of our lands within our treaty-defined reservations and subject to our primary jurisdiction. The federal government should be able to protect our lands against sale and external taxation and regulation, not management or interference with our tribal government's land use decisions. Perhaps the most glaring defect of land trust status is how it interferes with economic development activities that we wish to pursue to support our people. For example, in recent years, we have sought to expand a retail shopping plaza with a convenience store to support our Class 3 gaming facility. We acquired the land in fee from non-Indian sellers, and we had to apply to the Bureau of Indian Affairs to have the land taken into trust. That took 14 years, and it's still not done today. We had to undergo extensive environmental review because the land is now considered to be in trust status. The utility service takes us time to hook up because the federal government has regulations governing rights-of-way and trust lands. We started this project 22 years ago and is still not finished. Nowhere in America, other than Indian country, does this kind of bureaucratic stranglehold occur. To remedy this situation, I recommend that the subcommittee considers acting on 3 different areas to improve the use of tribal lands. First, Congress should enact legislation to allow for any tribal nation at its own choosing to acquire lands under the jurisdiction in restricted fee status. Restricted fee is a long-established form of tribal land ownership, similar to trust status, but the land is considered owned by the Indian nation, not the federal government. The late Don Young, the former Dean of the House, supported tribal sovereignty for tribal governments to own their own land and exercise jurisdiction over them within our reservations. He developed legislation, the Native American Land Empowerment Act, that he introduced in the 112th Congress and subsequent Congresses to allow for Indian nations to acquire restricted fee lands within our existing reservations. He proposed a 90-day process that land acquired by the tribe in fee within the reservation would automatically be converted to restricted fee status under its ownership and jurisdiction. Enactment of this legislation would create an alternative process to the current fee to trust application. All tribal nations could save time, money, and strengthen our ability to engage in economic development within our reservations. Some tribes may not like the idea, but would prefer to have their lands held in trust. That's their right. But for these nations that want greater control over our lands, the use of federal government, we should have the opportunity as well. Right now, Indian nations are limited in our ability to lease our lands without federal government approval. And, Congress took the step to enact the Hearth Act, which we have been using to our advantage. We should simply fix this situation by enacting legislation that allows any Indians that want the authority to lease lands with a 99-year lease. And we want to thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for introducing that bill as well. At this time, I would like to thank you again, Madam Chairwoman, and the subcommittee members for this opportunity to testify today. For 50 years, the official policy of the Congress has been to support tribal sovereignty and self-determination. More must be done to make this a reality, and I support tribal economic self-sufficiency. I'm glad to take any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and your entire statement is in the record. Thank you for your testimony, and the chair now recognizes the Honorable Waveline Saunders for 5 minutes.
Good day. My name is Waveline Saunders. I am the Thanatam Nation Vice Chairwoman. Good morning, Chair Hageman, Ranking Member Leader Fernandez, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. The nation is a federally recognized tribe with more than 34,000 members. Our reservation is one of the largest in the United States, roughly the size of Connecticut. The nation appreciates the subcommittee's focus on economic development, as this is an issue critically important to the Thanatam Nation. We are particularly concerned about how inadequate and outdated infrastructure thwarts the development of healthy, diverse tribal economies, including the impact it has on our small business owners. So we appreciate this opportunity to testify. First, more serious federal investment in the repair and maintenance of BIA roads is very, very critical on the Thanatam Nation, as I'm sure it is throughout Indian country. Reservation-based businesses must be given the opportunity to get their products and their customers to market. The remoteness of our reservation and the extremely poor conditions of our roads are significant barriers for both tribal members and internal partners who otherwise want to develop businesses in our communities. Chronic underfunding of the BIA roads maintenance program leaves our roads severely compromised by sinkholes, potholes, broken and cracked pavement, and washed out bridges. These roads are dangerous for our members as well as our visitors. During monsoon seasons, flooding completely washes out our roads and makes them impassable. According to a December 2018 U.S. Commission on Civil Rights report, deficiencies in transportation system infrastructure in Indian country diminishes opportunities for development, which further impairs the ability of tribal communities to thrive. Second, we need better utility infrastructure. Rural communities such as ours in Indian country suffer from profound deficiencies in availability of basic utilities to provide adequate drinking water, sanitation, and electricity to majority of our communities. On the nation, utility hookup is extremely expensive, creating serious barriers to the development of new businesses. Lack of utility access impacts not just the operation of a new business, but also its potential workforce. More than 12% of tribal homes lack access to safe drinking water and basic sanitation, which is a rate more than 20 times higher than the national average. This fundamental deficiency in the quality of life undermines the availability and retention of a ready workforce and poses a significant barrier to creating reservation-based economic and employment opportunities. I also want to underscore the importance of telecommunication and internet access. Lack of access to broadband inhibits our ability to spur economic development and to train a technically skilled workforce, as well as continuing education for all of our students and schools within the boundaries of the Tohono Nation. The state of Arizona found that 95% of people living on tribal lands either have unserved or underserved telecommunication access. The nation appreciates Congress's recent attention to these issues, but continued efforts and funding are absolutely critical. Our citizens are challenged by difficulty in securing capital to develop businesses on trust lands, inadequate access to banking services generally, and inadequate access to business and technical training. The nation would like to see greater investment in helping potential small business owners start and grow their own. Lastly, review and approval by BIA is required for a host of infrastructure and other development on Indian lands. The challenges we face as a Tohono Nation illustrate the dismal condition of physical infrastructure in rural Indian country and the importance of investment in our communities. We welcome the opportunity to work with the committee to find ways to address the challenges, and we thank you for your time in addressing all of our concerns on behalf of the Tohono Nation and Indian country. Thank you.
I thank the witness for your testimony. The chair now recognizes Mr. Jason Robison for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chair Hageman, ranking members of Ledger Fernandez, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Jason Robison. I'm the Lands and Resource Officer for the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians. On behalf of Tribal Chair Carla Keene and Vice Chair Gary Jackson, I want to thank you for this opportunity to testify today regarding unlocking Indian country's economic potential. I want to first commend the efforts of this subcommittee, the administration, and tribal leaders across the country for seeking innovative approaches to promoting tribal self-governance and providing more opportunities to tribes to manage tribal lands and resources according to tribal values, goals, and objectives. It is a goal we all share, and the tribe welcomes this opportunity to participate in discussions which could help shape new opportunities for tribes throughout the country. Cow Creek is one of 9 federally recognized tribes in the state of Oregon. The tribe has just over 1,900 tribal members, and Cow Creek has a rich history in Southern Oregon that reflects its hard work, perseverance, and desire to be self-reliant. Cow Creek owns and manages approximately 30,000 acres of land within Oregon, comprised of approximately 15,000 acres of fee land, 23,000 acres of trust, and approximately 30,000 acres of forest lands managed to promote the social, ecological, and economic goals and objectives laid out in the tribe's approved forest management plan. The tribe is the second largest employer in Douglas County, employing approximately 1,000 tribal and non-tribal people. The Umpqua Indian Development Corporation is the tribe's primary economic development engine. UIDC businesses and tribal resource management provide much of the needed revenues for tribal government operations, which provide social services, housing, education, healthcare, and elders care to the membership. The tribe is a strong advocate for Indian self-determination and self-governance. We operate our governmental programs under a self-governance compact approved by the tribe and the Secretary of Interior. Under the compact, the tribe has been able to redesign programs and carry out activities under tribal policies and procedures rather than burdensome processes contained in federal manuals and handbooks. This has allowed more efficient operations, which better serves the interests of our tribal membership and our environment. On June 1st, 2018, the President signed the Oregon Tribal Economic Development Act, which clarified that transactions involving land owned in fee by Cow Creek and other Oregon tribes were not subject to the Non-Intercourse Act. The Oregon Tribal Economic Development Act makes it crystal clear that Cow Creek may sell or otherwise develop its fee lands free from federal interference. improving its ability to create economic opportunities while protecting the environment at or above federal environmental standards. In 2010, Congress passed a bill to amend the Act of August 1955 to authorize the Cow Creek and other tribes in Oregon to obtain 99-year lease authority. This lease authority has provided the tribe with an opportunity to package longer-term business arrangements on tribal land. The Hearth Act of 2012 has also provided opportunities for expanded lease authorities on tribal lands, in addition to allowing the tribe to develop its own regulations and policies approved by the Secretary of Interior. These types of authorities and actions provide tribes with the ability to conduct business in a more competitive and attractive environment. They also create certainty for tribes, which is a must if we are to eventually achieve self-determination and self-governance. Without these types of authorities and actions, tribes are being punished and held at a substantial disadvantage. Restricted fee title is one classification of Indian lands. However, very few tribes have the opportunity to use this status to their advantage. We recommend this committee pursue opportunities to expand this land use designation across Indian country. The Cow Creek were one of the first tribes in the country to enter into a demonstration project established under Section 2 of the Indian Trust Asset Reform Act, ITARA. Under the ITARA demonstration project, the tribe prepared an Indian Trust Asset Management Plan, or an ITAMP, for forest management. The approved ITAMP allows the tribe to perform forest management activities under tribal law and tribal forestry regulations rather than federal rules. Numerous forest management actions which previously required federal agency approval and could take a year or more to implement are now approved solely by the tribe and implemented in a manner of a few months or less while still meeting applicable federal law. ITARA has allowed advancement along a pathway to achieve the tribe's vision of the forest. This is another example of our success in strengthening tribal sovereignty. We'd like to see this authority become permanent. The tribe has also taken steps to utilize authorities under the Tribal Forest Protection Act, the Agricultural Improvement Act, to develop co-management agreements with adjacent federal land managers. These authorities and agreements add to the list of tools that have been made available to tribes for managing and protecting tribal members and tribal resources. We would request this committee assess new authorities that complement or expand these types of opportunities to tribes. It is our hope that we can continue to work together across Indian country on a bipartisan basis to fix lingering legislative issues like the Non-Intercourse Act, 99-year lease authority, the use of restricted fee status, and others in order to provide all of Indian country the same opportunity. It is also our hopes that by working together, we promote new legislation that empowers tribal governments, increases business opportunities for tribes, promotes tribal sovereignty and self-governance, and reduces the cost of administrative burdens of federal oversight on all designations of tribal land. We recommend that this subcommittee look into legislation like the Hearth Act and the Indian Trust Asset Reform Act as good examples of what works well in Indian country. In closing, I'd like to thank you for the time and opportunity to present testimony today regarding unlocking Indian country's economic potential. Cow Creek is at the forefront of many of these new laws, and we would welcome the opportunity to work with this committee and to you to draft new legislation. Again, thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I thank the witness for your testimony. The chair will now recognize members for 5 minutes for questions. And I will be going first, and I'm going to direct my first question to Mr. Dustin Clatouche. You mentioned in your statement that your tribe felt fortunate to have been able to secure enactment of a bill in the 117th Congress to allow the tribe to enter into leases up to 99 years. Was time of the essence in getting that bill passed, and why did the tribe need to get it done during the last Congress?
First and foremost, we wanted to keep the interests of the two outside entities that had approached us about warehouse projects. The more time that passed, the more likely that outside businesses will lose interest or look elsewhere. Also, we wanted to keep the option open to begin construction during the construction season in our area, which is April to October.
Wonderful, thank you for that. I'd like to also question Mr. Rupnick. You testified in favor of establishing a new process for acquiring lands under tribal jurisdiction in restricted fee status. Do you believe that restricted fee land status would be more efficient for the federal government as well as for the tribal governments?
Yes, I do. And part of that is that tribes can assume jurisdiction over those lands immediately, and thereby reducing resources needed from the federal government to manage and apply those lands there. Right now, as I stated in my testimony, we had fee status, application for a trust status that took over 14 years to be able to get that done, for us to try and enhance our operation, our Class 3 gaming operation. With the federal government, BIA, Department of Interior, going through all the different assessments and everything else, and just essentially stonewalling a lot of this stuff, that's what really hinders tribes when they're trying to build economic development within the reservation. So being able to reduce a lot of that paperwork, being able to reduce those areas that are required by oversight from regulations or unneeded regulations would definitely benefit the tribe and help reduce those costs. Thank you.
Well, that makes sense, and I'm surprised at the amount of time that you've referenced in your testimony as to what it took to be able to develop and move forward with those projects. Mr. Robinson, in 2016, Congress enacted the Indian Trust Asset Reform Act, which you referred to, and among several things, it authorized a demonstration project in which Indian tribes may be authorized to negotiate to assume management and control of its non-mineral trust assets under a plan approved by the Secretary of Interior. And under the ITERA demonstration project, your tribe took over some forest management activities, I understand. Can you tell the committee specifically what activities this includes and how ITERA works?
Yes, thank you for the question. So the forest management activities that the tribe assumed are those same forest management activities that are listed under the National Indian Forest Resource Management Act. So these include things like timber sales, timber permits, prescribed burn plans, forestry enterprise agreements, and other authorities that would generally be approved under the BIA through the National Indian Forest Resource Management Act. And the way that ITARA works is that as tribes assume responsibility under the demonstration project, they're able to take on those authorities that the Bureau of Indian Affairs had been performing on behalf of the tribe. And so now those decisions are being made by the tribal government under tribal rules and regulation as opposed to federal rules and regulations.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that. And finally, Ms. Waveline, you commented and testified about the need for infrastructure and the impact that a lack of roads has for the rural community that you represent, the rural tribes. Is the federal government involved in all of the decisions related to road building on your reservation?
Yes, on behalf of the Thanat Nation, the roads program is a BIA roads program. And so not only the state, but the federal roads that consist on the Thanat Nation, so the bureaucracy that does create for getting approvals and partnerships. I know that the nation has stepped up to try to remedy some of the impacts on the roads, but because of liability issues, we are prohibited from pursuing any of those endeavors in addressing the potholes, the cracks in the road, and our bridges and whatnot. And so it becomes a liability issue if the nation is to continue to address those needs. And so it's the BIA at the federal level that is technically responsible for the roads on the Thanat Nation. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Thank you all for your testimony and responding. The chair now recognizes the ranking minority member for her questioning.
Thank you, Chairwoman Hageman, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony. Vice Chairwoman Saunders, thank you very much for your testimony that laid out the multiple obstacles that tribes face, especially in rural areas. Can you talk a little bit more about financing and access to capital and workforce development? What do you think are the biggest financing obstacles for tribal small businesses on rural reservations?
So for businesses on the Thanat Nation, for whether it be tribal members or anyone wanting to partner in providing services to the Thanat Nation, we're about a good hour, maybe 50-mile drive from the nearest city. And so having to travel the roads and looking at the investment in regards to their products of services has been a challenge because of the technical availability of services and education, and for them to invest in our community based on the distance between the nearest city. And so the challenges that not only our members face for products that are readily available, but for those individuals and businesses that do have these products, and investing in traveling to our community and what it all entails, and more so today with the economy and the prices of all the products, it hits us on our reservation because of the delivery of services and the fees and how expensive it is. So it's really important to invest in small businesses at the community level, but also for those business off the nation to really look at their investments and not push it off onto our tribal members. So more funding availability to all businesses at all level what benefit. It's a win-win situation.
Thank you. And Chairman Rupnick, in the discussions about the a restricted fee status, I want to just clarify. The intent is to ensure that the land remains subject to tribal jurisdiction, not to state jurisdiction, no state taxation. So what you're trying to do, is it correct, is to make a process that is more streamlined for it to come into a restricted status, but that you retain full jurisdiction over the land. Is that correct?
That is correct. When you go through the trust application process, and some of the experience that we have had or realized over the last few years kind of depends on the local jurisdiction and who's elected into there. So when we apply for land into trust, that goes through the state, then the county, and all those different agencies can offer up objections to that, whether that land goes into trust. One of the biggest reasons why is because they realize that land comes off of their tax rolls. So they do everything that they can to make sure that those lands that are held in fee status are still taxable for the longest amount of period of time. That causes a lot of delay because then you're fighting with county, state governments to be able to move that process forward. Then you've got all of the other regulations that are coming down from Department of Interior, environmental assessments, so on and so forth, that really limits the tribe's ability to do anything on that land. Where if a streamlined process where 90 days that land is purchased and moved into a restricted fee status, then the tribes could immediately start developing lands or whatever businesses that they wish to pursue on that piece of property.
Thank you. And Chairman Clatouche, you, in your written testimony, you did mention your, because 5 minutes goes real fast, the idea of expanding the Buy Indian Act. Would you also recommend that we expand the ability of tribes to compact and contract outside of the two agencies that are limited to? I assume, does everybody have, I think everybody on this panel has either compacts or contracts, and would you all agree you'd love to have those expanded to the other agencies? Maybe we'll start with Chairman Clatouche.
The Buy Indian Act, as currently drafted, only applies to the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Indian Health Service. The Department of Defense is not included in the Buy Indian Act, and I believe that expanding the act to include the Defense Department would benefit all tribes.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I'll go straight over to Mr. Robinson. What do you think about expanding Buy Indian and compacting contracting?
So I can't speak to the Buy Indian, but I can say that anytime we have an opportunity to expand the compact authorities for tribes, it allows tribes to have a lot more opportunity for self-governance and streamlining of process and procedures.
So thank you very much, and now you're back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Lamalfa from California.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and congratulations on your role here. Looking forward to it, so thank you. Appreciate the panel from your time and travel to be here and be part of this here today and express your firsthand concerns with the processes here we have with, I share your frustration as well on getting permitting done to do some of the other things we need to do in my rural Northern California district, such as timber harvest, salvage after fire, water storage, many, many years involved. So we're all right in the same boat on that. And we're looking to find relief for you all and other tribes around the country on being able to do basic things, economic things that are good for your membership and such. So let me, and it was expressed a couple times too, the amount of time it takes and also the effort. Now, we're here to legislate, so it's our job, so we have nothing to complain about. But when an individual tribe, for example, we have cases where there's surplus lands being held by a federal entity, and a tribe nearby is interested in that, taking it off their books and put it into play. We've had those. We have more prospects up in my district, too, for tribes interested in that. But it requires an entire piece of legislation to move at whatever pace it moves through, hopefully within a 2-year cycle in Congress. And that's got to be frustrating because it's year after year after year. Or recognition for tribes here that, have had their recognition taken away in the past. So I get how frustrating that is, and there needs to be a lot more streamlining to get where you need to go. So Vice Chairwoman Saunders, you were talking about your lands there in Arizona a little bit, and you have in your purview 734 miles of roads that are under BIA jurisdiction to keep spiffed up, and obviously from your testimony, they're not spiffy. So what kind of progress do they make year in, year out, and is there an entity within the tribe, for example? Does the tribe have its own construction company that it could be doing that on its own with the right kind of funding?
Thank you for the question. On behalf of the Thon-Ott Nation, we have a BIA roads program. We have a Department of Planning and Economic Development that works hand in hand with the BIA roads program. And so looking to address that, the bureaucracy that it does create for the funding, channeling the funding through the BIA and getting the approvals, the time that in itself takes. But definitely our planning program has really improved in regards to addressing all of the grants that are available, all of the funding cycles that come through year in, year out, the time that it takes to actually get that funding and a contract in place to address the roads on our nation is years behind. And so I know that
How many miles of road have been done, let's say, in the last 3 years, do you think? Just a rough guess.
less than 100 miles.
Less than 100?
Yes.
Is that upgrading from perhaps dirt
Ma-
roads and gravel?
Maintenance and upgrades, and it's also in collaboration with some funding that came through CPP, because we do have Border Patrol that utilizes our roads as well, and so partnering with them to address and seek funding, but also having to still go through the whole BIA process.
Quickly, on your water situation, are you on well water, or do you draw, I'm not quite sure where you are in proximity. Do you use Colorado River water for any purpose, or are you all well water, or what's your source?
We are a part of the Colorado River, but we do have well source on the Thon-Ott Nation that delivers water to all of majority of our communities.
Okay, thank you. Let me shift to Mr. Robinson from Cow Creek here. What are, we talked about the 3 different styles of how land can be in fee or trust or a restricted fee. What do you find is going to be the most workable for you long term? You're just up the road from me a little bit, and the various things that you're trying to accomplish economically. What's going to be the best tool for you?
Great, thank you for that question. Really, I think having a variety of options on the table for the tribe to select from is important. And so I think, as I said in my testimony today, having restricted fee available for us as an option, which we don't currently have as an option, is something we're very interested in. And one of the challenges is obviously the taxation with the state, but also having additional authorities for us to manage those fee lands and provide potential business opportunities. It's extremely important. Trust lands, as we continue to work through the things like the Indian Trust Asset Reform Act, the Hearth Act, we're able to bring on more regulations and things within the tribal government, which makes things more streamlined, but trust lands continue to be a challenge for us as well, especially getting through the fee to trust process.
It's so hard. It's so hard. Yeah. For other 3 panelists, real fast, yes or no, are all 3 options really important to you for the other 3 here? Yes?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry, there's not more time. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Gonzalez-Colon from Puerto Rico.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and congratulations on chairing this committee. Happy to be here. And thank you all the witnesses for being here today. I was reading all the information regarding this hearing, and I was very surprised at the multiple levels of restrictions. You got to use your own land. And in that sense, even it's a trust land, fee land, or restricted fee land, at the end, I believe that land is the most important resource you have for economic development, for social, cultural issues. And when you got all those restrictions, there's no way you can succeed. So I'm happy this committee is doing this hearing to see how we can expedite and allow all the tribes to use their land. And we're talking about American Indians and, of course, Alaskan Natives as well. So one of the questions will be, in 2000, when I was reading the testimonies, Chairman Clatouche, you said that your tribe led efforts to repeal the prohibition on alcohol manufacturing on Indian lands. Coming from Puerto Rico, we produce a lot of alcohol and rum, so I know how important that is. So in your testimony, you mentioned that the tribe opened its Talking Cedar Brewery and Distillery in 2020 and during the pandemic. And my question will be how you're dealing with that at this time, and is there something regarding the Buy Indian Act that you're interested in selling products from this distillery to the nearby military base?
Yes. So the distillery and the restaurant have been doing pretty good since we've opened them. During the pandemic, the restaurant was one of the few restaurants open in the area, and we received a significant amount. But yes, we joint base Lewis McCord, yes.
And you were working to that end with the military base to sell your products using the Buy Indian Act to get all those products coming from the distillery to that place, right?
Yes.
What other challenges you have to create economic development in your lands?
For Chehalis, one of the biggest issues is staffing at the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Before, during, and especially after the pandemic, there just aren't enough people in the Northwest regional office to process routine approvals and tasks. Most of the staff continues to telework, which for a long period of time, the Northwest Regional Office did not have a contracting officer. So we cannot get our 638 contracts approved. The same goes for approval of business leases, right-of-ways, and other routine matters.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson, in your written testimony, you call on this committee to pursue opportunities to expand the use of restricted fee lands across the Indian country, including creating administrative process for this land designation. What should be the proposal, and how expanding the use of those restricted fee lands could help spur economic activity in your areas? What specific things we can do here to allow that growth from happening?
Great, I appreciate that question. So I think one of the things that we need to look at is how do we give access to this restricted fee classification to all tribes as a tool in their toolbox to manage fee lands subject to, or limited, without having the tax burden and without alienation, right? And so I think the restricted fee status, what that provides for Cow Creek is another option for us to look at those fee lands, hold that title for the tribe, and use additional regulations and opportunities through tribal laws and regulations, working with Congress to provide more efficient opportunities for economic development. It's an option we don't have in our toolbox right now, and I think is an option that we need to be able to look at different opportunities for economic development.
Thank you. And my last question will be to Mr. Rupnick. You say in your testimony that you've been almost 22 years since your tribe's retail shopping plaza project has been in the works and has not been completed yet. If you could look back and see on the planning stage, what other things you have changed in terms of those planning to accommodate the long time wait for that retail plaza to open, or the use of the land?
I think part of that is, just the strict interpretation on some of the regulations that are put in place that tribes are forced to work with. That would also include the Non-Intercourse Act, which I think needs to be revised as well, too, because there's a strict interpretation on that. So if tribes go out and purchase fee simple land and they can't develop it or they can't do anything with it, then you almost have to have a piece of legislation to allow tribes to be able to sell that to recoup whatever dollars they got already invested into that as well. But some of that process that we have right now is of course, it's just a huge bureaucracy when it comes to land into trust. And being able to streamline that process through the Department of Interior would help tribes tremendously when they're moving either into restricted fee or even that trust process that gives them that option of how they want to handle those lands.
Thank you, sir. My time expired. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Stansberry from New Mexico.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I also want to congratulate you on your chairmanship and welcome you to the committee, and also to the ranking member and my sister from New Mexico. And also, I want to welcome all of our tribal leaders who are here, not only on the panel, but in the audience and also tuning in today. Thank you for traveling and thank you for being here with us today. I'm Melanie Stansbury and I represent New Mexico's 1st Congressional District, which is proudly home to a number of tribes and pueblos in New Mexico. New Mexico, of course, is home to 23 federally recognized tribes and pueblos. And the first thing that I want to just acknowledge is that while we're here to talk about economic development opportunities, our tribes and pueblos are already economic powerhouses in New Mexico and are, in fact, among some of the largest employers and generators of income in the state. In fact, amongst our tribes and pueblos, 19 of our 19 pueblos generate over $500 million in revenue alone every year in our state and employ over 11,000 people statewide. These enterprises are vital not only to our tribal communities, but also to our local and regional and state economies, and are primary sources of funding for tribal governments, as our tribal leaders know here, to fund vital services, including emergency services, roads, elder support, and so much more. I also want to just take a moment to highlight a couple of the pueblos and tribes that are in our district, in the 1st Congressional District. In particular, Sandia Pueblo, which is just north of Albuquerque, which is my hometown, employs thousands of residents living in the Albuquerque area and has quite a diversified economic portfolio. And Mescalero Apache in the southern portion of my district operates an amazing set of enterprises around the hospitality and ski businesses, as well as a number of other major enterprises in southern New Mexico. But as I was listening to the testimony this morning and also reading your testimony, I was struck by the number of barriers that still obviously are presented to so many of our tribal nations in terms of self-determination and nation building that extend far beyond even the conversation that we've had here today. And so, Madam Chairwoman, while we have made a number of huge steps forward in passing the bipartisan infrastructure law, which made massive investments, hundreds of millions of dollars of investments that have not yet hit many of our communities in terms of roads, water, broadband, and as well as the Inflation Reduction Act, which will bring a lot of money for energy infrastructure, water infrastructure. And we know that Secretary Deb Haaland and our president have made a strong commitment to tribal consultation, nation building, and economic investment. I was particularly struck by Chairwoman Saunders' testimony about the many and multivariate barriers, whether it's infrastructure, broadband, all of these things. So I want to just do a quick lightning round for all of our panelists because we do have limited time. You've presented testimony to us today, and I'm going to put you each on the spot. this is an opportunity to present to all of us and to the country. If there was one thing that you could do in Congress that you personally think would have a major impact on economic development in your communities or across our tribal nations, what would it be? And I'll start with Mr. Clatouche. Yeah.
The Buy Indian Act.
Okay. And Mr. Rupnick?
There's a couple of things, one of them is dual taxation. I know that isn't a area for this committee here too, but yeah, restricted fee, allowing nations more tools in their toolbox to be able to use the land as they best see fit.
Thank you. Vice Chairwoman?
I would say the additional funding for resources for technical assistance and providing education and really looking at the different ways of the bureaucracy such as BIA and just the process in itself to try to streamline those timeframes and the processes in itself for the benefit of all.
Thank you. And Mr. Robinson?
Great, thank you for the question. I really think continuing to promote self-governance and tribal sovereignty by allowing tribes to manage their lands and resources according to tribal laws and regulations and tribal policies to meet tribal goals and objectives.
All right. Well, I'm amazed that we got through everyone. Obviously, this is just the first chapter of hopefully many conversations about hopefully bipartisan legislation we could advance to help support our tribal nations. So we appreciate you being here today, and thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you. And I want to thank the witnesses for your incredibly valuable testimony and the members for their questions. Thank you for being here today. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to these in writing. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee must submit questions to the committee clerk by 5 p.m. on Friday, March 3rd, 2023. The hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for those responses. If there is no further business, without a...
Second round of questions?
We've got to vote.
Is the vote up? Sorry about that.
Would you like to have a...
I'd like to take one more shot if that's okay.
which time do we have? Mr. Lamalfa from California does have a follow-up question.
Thank you. Thanks for the indulgence on that. We've got you here, so I'd like the opportunity for follow-up. Mr. Robinson from Cow Creek, I wanted to touch a little more on the issues of dealing with the Endangered Species Act and timber management and such as that. So what has your tribe encountered with trying to deal with timber harvest? And I understand you had a demonstration project that you're looking at on demonstrating better forestry practices. So what has the spotted owl species, for example, brought as part of inhibiting your process there?
Thanks, the great question. Under ITARA, we have allowed, so we've taken over all the authorities from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So as far as the spotted owl, we actually do on-site monitoring and management of spotted owls under our tribal authorities. We have a tribal environmental review process that we follow now, as opposed to the National Environmental Policy Act. And for our ESA compliance, because we have assumed the federal responsibility, we no longer follow Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act. We actually fall under Section 9, the take avoidance. So we use a very comprehensive take avoidance strategy. We also have the opportunity to develop a species conservation plan working with the services on tribal lands. So really, as we look at tribal land management under ITARA for the tribe, things have actually gotten quite easier. To the question, though, on working with our adjacent federal land partners, that continues to be a challenge for us as we look at ways to reduce wildfire risk, increase forest resiliency and forest health. We have to find a way to work around the Endangered Species Act and other environmental laws that are set in place for obviously good reasons, but can be challenging and encumbersome to actually get good work done on the ground to enhance those resources.
We've had massive wildfires in Northern California and Southern Oregon. I had a 1 million acre Dixie fire, which affected my district. You had large fires in Oregon last, was it last year, 2 years ago? Doesn't matter right now, but did it come from federal land onto tribal land in your particular situation, and how many acres did it devastate?
Yeah, so we actually lost, we had a couple of fires on tribal lands immediately after the Western Oregon Tribal Fairness Act was passed, and we received 17,800 acres of BLM lands back to the tribe. We had about a 3,600 acre fire that took about 20% of that new ownership out. That actually came on from the state lands onto tribal lands and resulted in impact. But here recently, in the last few years, we've had several fires threatening tribal lands. And we've worked very diligently with the Umpqua National Forest to try to figure out how we alleviate the potential threat from those adjacent lands onto tribal lands. And so just a few years ago, we had the Smith Fire, which was a small fire, started out 10 to 12 acres. It sat unattended for about 10 days and then blew up into about a 70,000 acre fire threatening tribal fee lands and trust lands. So we have to find a way to reduce that wildfire risk.
Please submit some of your thoughts and watch what we're going to do in the subcommittee on forestry and in the ag committee, if you would, and we'll be looking at that. Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the indulgence. I'll yield back.
Thank you. Excellent questions, and appreciate the testimony and additional information. So again, if there is no further business, without objection, the committee stands